This video covers the wild story of the NFL player who risked his career, his multi-million-dollar contract, and his freedom to chase a life of crime as a drugs kingpin, with devastating consequences that saw him go from NFL player to federal inmate overnight. Sam Hurd was never supposed to make it to the NFL in the first place. Lightly recruited heading into college football, he fought and clawed his way into an NFL shot, going undrafted and signing with the Dallas Cowboys as a long shot to make the roster. But against all the odds, he managed to stick around with the Cowboys for multiple years, making an impact and landing himself a multi-million-dollar contract with the Chicago Bears. And yet, just as it seemed he'd established himself in the NFL and set himself up for life financially, everything around him would come crashing down in shocking fashion, as an FBI investigation exposed that Sam Hurd had been living a double life as a drugs kingpin, intent on rising to the top of the criminal underworld while playing in the NFL. From multi-millionaire NFL player to serving 15 years behind bars, this is the true story of the rise and fall of Sam Hurd. Sam Hurd's journey to the NFL began in 1985 in San Antonio, Texas, where he was born into the impoverished Denver Heights area of the city. Denver Heights was an area filled with abandoned homes, drugs, and criminal gangs, the type of place where it's easy for young, impressionable kids to fall into a life of crime and delinquency. And Sam Hurd needed no reminders of the potential dangers of his neighborhood, given the impact it had had on members of his own family, with his cousin Tyrone a convicted drug dealer who spent most of Sam's childhood behind bars. His uncle Jimmy Corbin was another example of the pitfalls of criminality, as he would also spend time behind bars before later being shot dead outside his home. Luckily for Sam Hurd, his mother was determined to set her son on a better path, and she was heavily involved in the local community, guiding Sam and steering him away from trouble in favor of playing sports. Sam played basketball and ran track, but his true love was playing football. But Sam, a perennial underdog, would struggle with making the team his first few years, before a growth spurt saw him shoot up to 6'3" tall, laying the foundations for a dominant senior year at wide receiver that saw him put up 1,639 yards and 20 touchdowns. These stats would put him on the radar of colleges, and Hurd began to receive offers to play at the next level. But these offers weren't coming from the Alabamas and Georgias of the world, with Sam Hurd accepting an offer from Northern Illinois University, not exactly a powerhouse sending tons of guys to the league on a yearly basis, and the chances of Sam Hurd making the NFL were extremely slim. However, one positive was that Sam Hurd was finally moving away from his hometown of San Antonio and away from any bad influences who could have put him on the wrong path. Despite initially starting 5th on the depth chart at wide receiver, his first season at Northern Illinois was a successful one, as he made an instant impact for the Huskies, grabbing 22 receptions for 512 yards and 3 touchdowns, emerging as a deep ball threat in the process. With numbers like that as a true freshman, some might have earmarked him for a dominant sophomore season, but that didn't quite materialize, with his stats declining to 29 receptions for 438 yards and 2 TDs. With NFL dreams on his mind, Sam Hurd really needed a breakout type year in his junior season to begin making his case for an NFL draft selection. But unfortunately for him, the Northern Illinois offense was a run-first offense that gave limited opportunities to pass catchers, and his junior year was his worst season yet, with 27 receptions for just 298 yards and 3 touchdowns. A second straight year of declining production. At this point, absolutely nobody would have been putting Sam Hurd down as someone capable of making it into the NFL. Considering he wasn't playing at the top level of college football in the Power 5, a junior year of just 298 receiving yards meant he needed a miraculous turnaround in his final year to even sniff an NFL training camp spot. In this day and age, it would have been easy for Sam Hurd to jump in the transfer portal and find a more advantageous pass-heavy situation to play in. But back in 2005, the portal didn't exist yet, and Hurd was essentially stuck playing for a team with an offensive style that could kill his NFL dream stone dead. In a situation like this, it could have been easy to lose hope and feel demoralized, but that wasn't Sam Hurd, and whenever the odds were stacked against him, he always seemed to find a way to win, just as he had when struggling to make it onto his high school team. In his final year in college, Sam Hurd would have a monster breakout year for the Huskies, delivering 65 receptions for 1,074 yards and a massive 13 touchdowns, which was a school record. That wasn't the only school record Sam Hurd took, as his 266 receiving yards against Central Michigan was the most in Northern Illinois history in one game. In just 1 year, Sam Hurd had gone from a guy with absolutely no shot of making it to the NFL to someone worthy of a team taking a look at him. But given he only had one strong season against limited competition, it was far from a given that Sam Hurd would be able to stick around in the NFL, with the most likely outcome being a training camp invite as an undrafted free agent before getting cut and moving on with his life. But again, when the odds are against him, Sam Hurd seems to thrive. Unsurprisingly, despite his size and his senior year stats, Sam Hurd was not one of the men lucky enough to hear his name called in the NFL draft. But all he needed was one opportunity to show what he was capable of, and he would get it from none other than the Dallas Cowboys from his home state of Texas, a team most of his family had grown up supporting. While undrafted free agents make up a surprisingly high percentage of active NFL players, there are so many undrafted players every year that the odds of making a final roster are incredibly slim, particularly when teams are likely to be biased towards the players that they have expended a draft pick to select. But again, with the odds against him, Sam Hurd got his head down and worked his balls off to fight all the way through Cowboys training camp and eventually made it onto the Cowboys final roster. Hurd spent the summer learning the playbook front to back and pestered team veterans for advice, staying late after practices to work with legendary wide receiver Terrell Owens to improve further. As an undrafted free agent, you need to make the most of every opportunity you get to contribute, and Sam Hurd found his opportunity primarily through special teams. Heading into his rookie year, special teams was viewed as his primary duty, with not many expectations that he would see playing time at wide receiver for the Cowboys. But surprisingly, Hurd would work his way onto the field as a receiver in his rookie year, catching his first NFL pass in Week 5 from Tony Romo, in what was ironically also Romo's first ever NFL pass. 4 weeks later, Hurd had his best game yet, grabbing 4 catches for 42 yards in Week 9. His end-of-season stats totaled less than 100 yards, but he was a consistent force on special teams, and the fact he'd even seen the field at receiver was more than had been expected of him. A successful rookie year that gave him confidence he could compete at the NFL level. Now he was a success story and role model for his community in Denver Heights, playing for their favorite NFL team. Sam Hurd was quick to give back to the community by running summer camps in his neighborhood for local kids to try and inspire them to avoid the very same criminal life that Hurd himself would later fall into with catastrophic consequences. In his second season with the Cowboys, Hurd continued his climb up the depth chart, rising up to become the Cowboys' third wide receiver. Hurd was never a guy who dominated straight away, but he'd always fight his way through obstacles over time and make the absolute most of his God-given talent. His second year saw him expand his role for the Cowboys, flashing talent as a receiving option by putting up 314 receiving yards and grabbing the first touchdown catch of his NFL career, all while still continuing to star on special teams. If you can become a leader on special teams and you're also capable of grabbing some catches at receiver, you're never going to be the star of the team, but you will have the chance to stick around in the NFL for many years and earn yourself millions of dollars in the process, and this was the exact path that Sam Hurd was on. But things would continue to get better for him, as heading into the 2008 season, the Cowboys opted to release starting receiver Terry Glenn, meaning Hurd had the chance to take some of Glenn's targets for himself. But unfortunately, with the biggest opportunity of his career in front of him, his body would let him down, with an ankle injury forcing him to miss the first 3 games of the season. Still struggling with the injury, he would come back to play the next 3 games, but he failed to record a single catch and ended up re-injuring the same ankle to the point that it required season-ending surgery. Before he'd even really gotten started, the biggest opportunity of his career had vanished before his eyes, and it seemed unlikely he'd be handed another shot to earn a prominent role on the Cowboys' offense. A crushing blow for a guy who'd been riding a wave of forward momentum for years. After smashing through ceiling after ceiling on his rise to the NFL, it seemed Sam Hurd may finally have reached an obstacle that he couldn't overcome, and his visions of becoming a star for the Cowboys maybe weren't going to come true after all. Some people would have been happy with the roster spot, but Hurd desired more, and as he rehabbed his ankle injury post-surgery, he began to stress and fret over whether he'd even be able to keep his roster spot when he recovered. These stress and doubts about his future would lead Hurd to start smoking more and more weed to try and self-medicate his mind. Smoking weed was definitely not uncommon in the NFL, even back in the 2000s, when it was deemed a more serious issue, but Hurd quickly escalated from smoking a few joints a week to admitting he used it all day, every day. Even after recovering from ankle surgery and resuming training for a comeback, Hurd continued to smoke as often as possible, with hours after practice that could have been used to put in extra work or study game film, instead being replaced by Hurd getting high. In fact, his habit escalated to the point that to keep up with the enormous quantities he was smoking, he would arrange for shipments of California's finest weed to be sent to him, and before long, these shipments of high-grade weed were being shared amongst friends and teammates. Hurd had no intention of becoming a dealer and looking to turn a profit, instead selling the weed at cost to those close to him to share the love of the high-quality imports he was able to source. But the size of these imports continued to ramp up, and eventually they would reach a staggering 10 pounds at a time, connecting Hurd with serious criminal figures in California. A slippery slope that would one day result in his demise. In his comeback season, Hurd was relegated back to being the backup wide receiver and a special teams guy with very few opportunities for receptions. Over the next 2 seasons with Dallas, he would never hit more than 150 receiving yards in a season, and he now looks cemented in his role as a special teams player. Not a bad life by any means, but Sam Hurd had the perfect reminder every day in the Cowboys locker room of what could have been for him in Miles Austin, a fellow undrafted free agent who'd signed with the Cowboys in the same year as Hurd. But where Hurd had failed to make it as a starter, Miles Austin had stepped up and become a star. As Hurd was barely clinging onto a roster spot, Miles Austin was becoming a Pro Bowler, putting up a monster 1,300 yards in 2009, earning himself a massive 7-year, $54 million contract in the process. Sam Hurd was helping to support a large network of friends and family, and was also living a typical NFL player high-cost lifestyle, despite his comparatively meager contract size. Hurd found himself surrounded by superstars making exponentially more than him, while grappling with the reality that his place in the NFL could be gone at any moment. The ambitions or hopes of becoming a star seemed to have faded, and Hurd no longer believed he was destined for more, instead being forced to settle into his role on special teams and enjoy making several million a year for as long as it lasted. But Hurd decided that one way or another he was going to get the earnings of an NFL superstar, no matter what it took. In 2011, Sam Hurd's Cowboys contract had expired as the NFL entered a lockout period. This lockout meant Hurd temporarily was unable to negotiate a new contract, and it must have heightened the level of uncertainty and insecurity that Sam Hurd felt over his future, possibly fearing he would never get another contract. And it was with those feelings of doubts combined with his unerring desire to make as much money as possible that he made the fateful decision to cross the line into criminality, a decision he'd spend years wishing he could take back. Hurd had managed to stick around with the Cowboys for 5 years. It was an impressive run, but as the NFL emerged out of its lockout period, his time in Dallas was over, as he opted to reject the deal to stay with the Cowboys in favor of signing a 3-year, $5.1 million contract with the Chicago Bears. A change of scenery and perhaps another chance to make an impact at wide receiver. Sam Hurd didn't know it at the time, but this was the last NFL contract he would ever sign, and he'd be out of the league for good within months, but for reasons that nobody saw coming. Unfortunately, as the 2011 season began, the now 26-year-old Sam Hurd would again struggle to make the impact at receiver that he had hoped for. And heading into week 13, he had recorded just 8 receptions on the year for 109 yards. Again playing predominantly as a special teamer for the Bears. But by this point, Sam Hurd's attention wasn't completely focused on football. Instead, his attention was increasingly being drawn towards his side hustle, a side hustle that was about to be exposed to the world. As a fairly unknown player who'd never lit up the NFL in his 5 seasons in the league, Sam Hurd was not exactly a regular name in the headlines. But as we entered week 13 of the 2011 NFL season, Sam Hurd would become the story of the week for all the wrong reasons. While Bears fans had been watching Sam Hurd on the field, Hurd was also attracting an audience off the field, with his every move being watched by none other than the FBI. And after watching Hurd for months, in December 2011 they were finally ready to make their move and expose the double life that Sam Hurd had been living. The bombshell would drop on December 14th when it was announced Sam Hurd had been arrested by federal agents for his role as a major player in a large-scale cocaine and marijuana distribution conspiracy, with allegations Hurd was planning to push drugs all over Chicago. What had begun as a casual weed habit shared with some friends had evolved into a completely different beast, and with the feds involved, Sam Hurd's career and life looked like it was over. The quantities involved were staggering, with Hurd and his co-conspirators accused of trying to buy 10 kilograms of coke and 1,000 pounds of marijuana per week, with plans on setting up a huge network of distributors to flood the city. In the blink of an eye, Sam Hurd had gone from multi-million-dollar NFL contract to facing a potential life sentence in prison, and it had all begun with an investigation that had started while Hurd was still living in Dallas, just weeks away from signing his contract with the Bears. Federal agents investigating a Dallas-based drug ring hit the jackpot when, acting on intelligence, they decided to pull over the car of Toby Lejeune. An eyebrow-raising sum of $88,000 was found in Toby's car. Money Toby insisted was for personal reasons, but feds strongly believed was to be used to purchase drugs. But perhaps more interesting was the name the vehicle pulled over was registered in, with it being none other than former Dallas Cowboy Sam Hurd. Hurd, who was previously not on the radar of police, was now slotted into the case as a potential piece of the puzzle. But even the agents investigating may not have guessed just how deep into the game Hurd had gotten. The agents began to conduct surveillance on Hurd and his associates, and they saw enough to believe that it was worth digging further to try and get direct evidence of Hurd's involvement, however minor it might be. Though at this point they were beginning to suspect he was more of a major player than anyone had guessed. A sting operation was authorized, with undercover agents posing as drug suppliers, aiming to see if Sam Hurd would be interested in purchasing large quantities of drugs. But just weeks later, Hurd signed with the Chicago Bears and packed his bags, leaving Dallas to begin the next chapter of his NFL career. The FBI was onto him, sure, but they lacked the hard evidence that they'd been hoping for. And if Sam Hurd opted to leave his double life behind now that he was away from Dallas, he could have gotten away without trouble. But by this point, he was married to the drug game, and moving states wasn't going to stop him. The FBI agents who had been tailing him in Dallas extended their operation to his new base of Chicago, and they enlisted the help of the DEA to lay their sting operation. Their undercover operatives were successful in getting into contact with one of Sam Hurd's intermediaries, and after the agents indicated they had the ability to supply huge quantities of drugs, this intermediary was convinced to introduce them to the head honcho of their drug dealing operation, none other than Sam Hurd. A meeting was scheduled to take place at Morton's Steakhouse in Rosemont, Illinois, and Sam Hurd arrived with the intent to conduct business. He didn't seem to have any concerns around vetting the legitimacy of the men sat in front of him. It wasn't long after shaking hands that Hurd began detailing to the agents exactly what he needed from them. He was looking for a supplier capable of providing 5 to 10 kilos of coke and 1,000 pounds of marijuana on a weekly basis, a staggering level of investment that would stretch into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for the quantities Hurd was asking for. Hurd boasted to the agents that he had a large base of customers ready to go and was expecting to generate millions of profit, with a network of distributors eager to get going, pushing drugs all over Chicago. Hurd was blissfully unaware that he was putting the final nail in his metaphorical coffin with every word he spoke. The agents of course told Hurd those quantities were no problem for them, and the meeting concluded with Sam Hurd agreeing to purchase narcotics in bulk from the agents on a weekly basis. Hurd walked out of the steakhouse dreaming of the money he was going to print now that he had finally secured the supply he was after. But any dreams of rivaling the earnings of elite-level NFL contracts or El Chapo came crashing down when federal agents waiting outside the steakhouse pounced on him and put him in cuffs. Hurd barely had time to process what was happening before he was in the back of a cop car heading to the station, with life as he knew it over. As news of his arrest broke and shocked the NFL world, the case against Hurd continued to get stronger as the feds began to paint a picture of how Sam Hurd had gone from small-time dealer in Dallas, hooking friends and family up, to an escalating business of dealing drugs at larger and larger scales, all funded by money from his NFL contracts. But if you thought getting caught red-handed by the feds would have made Hurd learn his lesson, you were sadly mistaken, as he would make the unbelievable decision to violate the terms of his bond by failing a drugs test. And even worse, he would continue to try and deal drugs, with Hurd's cousin later testifying that Hurd had purchased 30 pounds of weed from him after his December arrest. Hurd's bond was revoked and he would spend the rest of his time awaiting trial behind bars. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, when Hurd was put before the courts, he would initially plead not guilty, wanting to take his chances at trial. But as the prosecution laid out its evidence against him and some of his associates began to flip, it was clear that Sam Hurd was not getting out of this one, and he would eventually flip his plea to guilty on all charges, with no plea deal in place, meaning a potential life sentence remained on the table. On November 13th, 2013, almost 2 years after his arrest at the steakhouse, Sam Hurd would finally receive his sentence. With a life sentence potentially in play, the judge was relatively merciful, giving Sam Hurd a sentence of 15 years behind bars. A devastating blow, but one that meant he would eventually get a chance to restart and rebuild his life, albeit a life completely different to the one he'd been living previously. As Hurd began serving his sentence, any discussions around him focused solely on using his story as a cautionary tale, an example of how greed can utterly ruin someone's life. Eventually, however, he faded from public consciousness and was forgotten. Forgotten until February 2023, that is, when news released that after serving 10 years in federal prison, Sam Hurd had been released and was now a free man once again. Aged 37 at the time of his release, he had wasted the prime of his career and most of the prime years of his life rotting in a cell. But now, he had the chance to start a new chapter. In the nearly 2 years since Sam Hurd was released from prison, nothing has been heard from him. I'm sure there was interest from media outlets in getting an interview from him and hearing the story from his perspective, but any attempts to reach him have so far been unsuccessful. We can only hope this silence is because he's focused on moving on from his past and instead working on becoming the best man he can be, rather than a case of him slipping back into the same criminal underworld that destroyed his life in the first place. Rising from the very bottom and fighting his way to the NFL against serious odds, Sam Hurd had the chance to be an inspiring example for his community and kids just like him of what is possible in life. But ultimately, he let greed and bad habits cascade to the point that he crossed the line into becoming a full-blown criminal. And ultimately, his legacy will be that of an example of the dangers of temptation, greed, and stupidity, with a stunning downfall the likes of which we rarely ever see. But what's done is done, and the only thing Sam Hurd can do is live the remainder of his life to its fullest potential, showing others that it's possible to come back from truly hitting rock bottom. And I wish him good luck in that journey. The end. Thank you for watching the video. Please drop a like, and if you enjoyed this video, you'll love my video on the college football player who killed his Tinder date in one of the wildest catfishing stories of all time. Subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this, and if you like MMA or the other football, then check out my other channels linked in the description below. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.